around long enough to amass those stats? That's a good question, because in some cases I think some of the players that have gotten into Hall of Fames weren't necessarily groundbreaking generational players. It's just they stayed around so long, they were able to rack up those stats. Not to say that they didn't deserve to, but we have a tendency to water down Hall of Fames. But, it's all in the... It's like the saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Greatness is in the eye of the sports fan or sports critic, what have you. And there are players who were great that didn't get the stats, that may not have had the careers, in some cases never had a chance to get a career in the pros going, like Len Bias, who I think would have been one of the all-time greats had he not tragically died of taking crack one night, unfortunately. And if you know the story, you know how tragic that is. It's like this was the one and only time he ever actually took crack, as far as I know, and he died, which is a great anti-drug argument, especially against crack, because, and other things like meth and such, because it will ruin your life. There's no question about that. And it'll kill you. And that, it hurt the Celtics. It kept the Celtics from keeping their dynasty going through the 90s. Could you imagine what the NBA would have been like had Len Bias, who in my opinion, at the time of Len Bias's leaving Maryland to go to the NBA, was on par with Jordan? You had a player who was every bit as good, in my opinion, as Jordan was in 1986. If Len Bias goes to the Celtics, doesn't die, goes to the Celtics and lives up to his expectations, the Celtics dynasty continues on, because Red Auerbach would have found in any way he could have to kept that dynasty going. And that would have meant the Celtics versus the Bulls throughout the 90s. It would have been a magnificent rivalry. Like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird was, Len Bias versus Michael Jordan would have been every bit as good. We'll never know. That's for something that alternate historians can deal with, or the great what-if people. But, yeah, it's definitely one of those things that you think about, because there are players who were cut down in their prime. Hank Gathers, for example. How good could he have been had he not died of a heart condition in 1990 at Loyola Marymount? He was one of the best players in the country at that time, who had a wealth of potential. He might have, if he had lived, he might have been a flash in the pan in the NBA, or it could have been one of the all-time greats. We'll never know. Same with Len Bias. It's sometimes luck of the draw. Look at Derrick Rose. Had it not been for injuries, he probably stays with the Bulls. Maybe, just maybe, he would have won an NBA title or two with them. So, with that all being said, I think it's important to remember that in the world of sports, it is an incredible, and I apologize. I'm finding out that we were disconnected on my Spreaker. I just happened to correct that. So if you've missed a good chunk of it, my apologies. Because we're talking about the argument of the greatest baseball player. Let's expand that for a bit more. Who's the greatest actor of all time? Nowadays, we blend actor and actresses into the same, who's to say the greatest actor of all time is a male? Maybe it's Meryl Streep. Maybe it's another great actress from the past or present. How do you define that? What does make a great actor and actress? Is it the breadth of skill or the depth of their skill? Is it audience appeal? Or is it the ability to convey emotions and evoke emotions from other people? Same with greatest singer, band, musician, writers, artist. Who's the greatest artist of all time? Depends on how you define art. Do you just define it as paintings or sculpture? Or do you broaden it to include video and audio production, music production? How do you define that? So when you have these broad categories, who's the greatest athlete of all time? Who do you put in there? And why? I remember at the end of the 20th century, at the end of 1999, there was a lot of talk about who the greatest athlete of all time. A lot of folks said it was Muhammad Ali. But how do you define, if you take away the political and historical aspects of the argument, how do you determine Muhammad Ali as the greatest athlete of all time? From a pure sports perspective. Do you talk about the breadth of his skill, the depth of his skill? He was a boxer. It depends on how you view boxing. And I'm not particularly fond of the sport. I have tremendous respect for Muhammad Ali. I think he's one of the greatest athletic personalities in our history, maybe the greatest, because of the societal change he's impacted over the length of his life, which sadly, unfortunately, a few years ago he passed away. But how you define a greatness of an athlete? Is it just strictly what they do on the field? Or is it their contribution to the community that they play in, or communities that they played in? To the sport in general? To society in general? How do you define that? That's a question that many sports talk show hosts don't really go into, because they don't look at the athlete other than just statistics. And while there's a good argument for that, because it's on the field, to me, Michael Jordan made the NBA popular in the South, especially where I'm from. Because I remember before Michael Jordan went to the NBA, I tried to talk the NBA up to some people at my school, and they looked at me like I was talking a foreign language. When Michael Jordan, at the time the single most popular ACC basketball player of all time, and I may be biased in that, he may not even been, to be honest with you, in Carolina he might have been the most popular Tar Heel of all time at that time. That might have been, you could have said Phil Ford was more popular. But when he came into the NBA, many of those people who had tried talking the NBA to before, who looked at me like I was from a foreign planet, which I can understand that, now all of a sudden we're like thinking they were experts at the NBA. And I'm like, hello, Dr. J, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, some of the others. So, to me, that made an impact, because he pushed the sport, not necessarily entirely by himself, but he himself pushed himself to the point where people recognize greatness. I mean, you look at The Last Ride documentary on ESPN. It was about Chicago Bulls' last season as the NBA champs in 1998, the final season of Jordan's career with the Chicago Bulls. How popular was that documentary compared to other documentaries of other NBA players, or other athletes for that matter? So when you have the argument of who's the greatest athlete of all time, it's not just what they do on the field, it's not just what they do during their playing career in some cases. It's what they do in total, both good and bad. Look at O.J. Simpson. Up until the time he committed those murders, and I have to say I do believe he did it. I think there are a lot of people, even the ones at the time who thought when he was found not guilty, they believed him. They don't necessarily believe him anymore. It's hard for people to imagine what O.J. Simpson was like before the trial, before the murders. He was massively popular. He was a well-liked sportscaster and former football player who did some acting, was in the famous Police Squad movies. It transformed. He was, he was a jolly guy. That was his public image. There was a reason why a lot of folks took a long time realizing he was a monster to Nicole Brown Simpson, and he did a very monstrous thing. And that is another point I want to make in this moment. When you put athletes on pedestals, they inevitably fail you. Maybe not in major ways like with O.J. Simpson or Lance Armstrong or others, but let's say you're a big fan of, let's see who's a great, John Morant. You're a big fan of his. You see him in an airport one day, and you want to get his autograph. Let's say you're a teenage kid, 13 years old, big basketball fan. You run up to him and ask for his autograph, and John Morant's probably exhausted, played back-to-back, would just want to get back to his hotel room or home or any place to just go to get some sleep, and he's rude to you. Not meaning to be rude, but just you caught him in a bad moment. That player is no longer going to be viewed in that kid's eyes. We have a habit of forgetting that athletes are human, that they're going to have bad moments. Same with celebrities. Do we think that celebrities are always going to be really nice people all the time? 24/7? No. They're going to have moments where they're going to be mean. Same with people we perceive as being mean are going to have moments where they're kind of nice. We're human. We all are. We have our flaws. We have everything like that. And we put athletes on pedestals like celebrities and such, and we forget that they're human. And when we don't agree with them, we go, what do they know? They're just celebrities. What do they know? Well, what do you know? Person who gets mad at a celebrity for voicing an opinion you don't like. You know what you are? You're just like them. You've got an opinion. You may not have as an informed opinion as they do. Maybe you have more of an informed opinion than they do. It just depends. It's like with me. Do I have more of an informed opinion about things than you do? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. You may know more about me, more about something on a particular subject than I do. That's why I don't come on here and pretend that I know everything, because I don't. I have an opinion about a great many things because I've learned a lot of things over the years, but doesn't mean I'm an expert in many things. And I'll be the first to admit when I'm wrong. If you present evidence and the evidence is legit and checks out and stands up to scrutiny, I'll be the first to admit I'm wrong. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. I don't want to be put on a pedestal or anything like that. I don't put any athlete on a pedestal. I don't think that any politician should be put on a pedestal. And I'm talking to you Trumpsters out there. You put your man on a pedestal, and guess what? You're going to find out very soon that he's going to highly disappoint you. Just like some folks who put Obama on a pedestal, and he wasn't the game changer as you thought he was. And I actually thought Obama did a pretty good job as president. I don't think he's the greatest of all time. I think he did as good of a job as he could under the circumstances, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's the greatest of all time. I like him better than Trump, though, by a long shot. But let's get back to greatest players of all time. That's like with politics. You have your thoughts, your opinions, and whatnot. There are plenty of people who love Jordan as the greatest basketball of all time. There are people who will go to their graves hating him and thinking he's overrated. He's not really that good. It was a supporting cast in Chicago that really made him. Other than that, he never was really that good. And you could make a legitimate argument. How many championships did Michael Jordan win without Scottie Pippen or Phil Jackson? There you go. How many Super Bowl titles did Bill Belichick win without Tom Brady as a head coach? You could make that argument. It is a team sport. How many cups would Wayne Gretzky have won without Mark Messier? Good question. And this is the thing that we have to remember. When we have these arguments, we tend to forget that the majority of sports in America are team sports. And in an individualized culture, which is America, we tend to be more individualistic than other countries, tend to put individuals on more of a pedestal than entire teams at times. But it's a lot more complex. Eras change, rules change. Nothing stays the same, especially in American sports, especially in a sport like football. Who's a better defender? Some guy that played in the 50s where you could clothesline people, or somebody right now where the rules are more restrictive, but yet they're still doing the job? Could you make an argument Luke Kuechly is a better linebacker than Dick Butkus? They played in different eras. Dick Butkus could get away with more because the rules were a lot. The rules that Luke had to play under were not there under Dick Butkus. So who's a better linebacker? That's a good question. We don't know. We can make that argument. People from Chicago will go to their graves saying Dick Butkus is better. People here in the Carolinas will say Luke Kuechly is clearly better. People of the modern era will say Kuechly is better. People who were kids during the Butkus years will say Butkus is better. And there'll be plenty of people who say neither one's the best. Lawrence Taylor, who I tend to think is better than Luke Kuechly and Dick Butkus both. It's the great thing about sports. You can make these arguments, but there are times when it gets tiresome. It takes away from the bigger issues in sports. We need to put it in perspective. We've had these arguments for the last 3 months because there's been nothing else to talk about. Except, God, it sucks that this pandemic's going on, that we can't watch live sports and all that, and when sports going to come back and all of this. So, yeah. I'm going to wrap up with this. The one thing I've learned during this pandemic is that, we should value entertainment more than we actually do. When we can't go out to the park or the ball game or whatever and enjoy a movie at the movie theater and all of this. We learn to value those things because when they're taken away by something like this, we realize how important they are to us. In some cases, they may be too important. For example, the racetrack in, I can't remember what county it's in, but it's the racetrack where last weekend, they in defiance of the governor's orders, they held races anyway with a full house there. Answer me this question. Was there a real need a real vital survival need for that race to take place last weekend? No. It didn't result in, if that race had not taken place, people would not have died. People would not have gone without. Just like a rain on baseball. Yes, it sucks the games can postpone, but you can't put players out there on the field with it raining and slick and possibly somebody getting hurt. Same goes for putting fans out there with the potential that they might get infected. Now, you can make the argument there's precautions out there. It seemed like things were getting better. Turns out they're not. So you can make this argument all you want to. But the truth is, sports and entertainment are not steak. They are the sizzle of life. They are the flavor enhancers of life. When push comes to shove, they are not needed as much as, say, plumbers and doctors and even fast food workers and janitors. That's the truth. We pay a lot of these athletes and a lot of these actors insane amounts of money, and they're extremely talented. Let's not get that wrong. But the truth of the matter is, if the NBA went away yet tomorrow, there was never an NBA game played again. In time, we would get used to it faster than we imagine. Because at one time in our history, there was no basketball. There were no movies. There was art, there was sport, but it wasn't organized like it is now. It's not the way it is now. And in some cases, change happens in ways that are painful. And maybe this is the moment we realize that athletes and actors and all this are grossly overpaid. And while we respect their abilities and all this to bring us joy and heartbreak and all this, we need to put it into perspective. Just because Wayne Gretzky is the greatest hockey player of all time, and arguably, doesn't mean that he is a better person than the janitor that's worked for 4 years keeping a hospital clean and doing a great job at that. And people know that they can always count on that guy to do his job. Or the fast food manager who keeps the line running at lunch hour rush and dinner rush and makes sure everything's clean, the people know what they're doing, and it keeps order and keeps the customers happy. Isn't that person great too? When are we talking about that? What about the police officer who, despite everything going on right now, still goes out there and does her job every day as best they can to serve their community, knowing what's going on and knowing that African Americans are not going to be looking at officers right now at all well, and still do the best job regardless of who they're serving. Same with teachers. This is a reality check, folks. I firmly believe this pandemic is a reality check from God, from the fates, from the universe itself. Who knows? Depends on what you believe. But I think we need to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, as the old saying goes. And I think that's something we really need to seriously look at, sit down and look at where our priorities are. Should we be building billion-dollar stadiums when police officers aren't getting the pay they deserve? And they get plenty of equipment. Most of the departments do, but in some cases it's not the right equipment. Some cases it's not the right training or the right compensation. Teachers are chronically underfunded. We underfund our infrastructure system. We underfund a lot of things public sector-wise, but we're more than happy to build a stadium with public funds. But guess what? $1 billion stadium, if you can't play sports in it, is what? Big warehouse. big, expensive warehouse. That's what we've got to remember. That's what we've got to realize is that this is a reminder from the universe or from God or whatever you believe that maybe, just maybe, we need to change our tune, to slow our roll, to change our perspective, because we aren't all that. Athletes aren't all that. Actors aren't all that. Politicians aren't all that. Corporate CEOs aren't all that. Media pundits, both left and right, aren't all that. I'm not all that. I'm just a guy with a podcast who may get a couple of listens, maybe a little bit more, depending on the subject. Excuse me, I just ate something and now it's kind of coming back to haunt me. That's why you heard that little gurgling sound. My apologies. But, I'm not somebody in a fancy studio with a fancy microphone making millions of dollars a year. But I dare say I have an opinion that's every right to be heard like those people do. And in some cases, maybe I'm more informed than they are. I may not be as charismatic. I may not sound as good. I know I slur my S's. I've been dealing with that all my life. I ain't the prettiest guy in the world, I'll tell you that much, but I'm of reasonable intelligence. I believe I have a wealth of knowledge and experience to be able to make an informed opinion about things after doing my due diligence and research and whatnot. Doesn't mean I'm automatically right. But I think, and more often than not, I'm closer to being right than I am wrong. And that's what matters. We put athletes and actors and musicians and all this on pedestals because we want to be them. We don't want to work at the post office. We don't want to work on the factory line. We don't want to work flipping burgers and stocking shelves and all that. We want to imagine ourselves in their role. When truth be told, they may be more miserable than you are. They may have more pressure on them than you are. They may have more issues than you do. You don't know. Just because you're rich doesn't automatically make you happy. Just because you're famous doesn't automatically make you happy. Wouldn't you get tired after a while of people going, hey, you're that person in that movie, or you're that person that plays that sport all the time? Recognition's great until you're recognized to death. So we put athletes and actors and whatnot on the pedestals, and we don't understand just how bad that is. Not because of anything they do. We do it. We're the ones that buy the tickets. We're the ones that buy the merchandise. We're the ones that buy the albums, buy the movies, watch the TV shows, listen to the radio. We all do that. They make money off of us. Just like your boss makes money off of you when you work at the plant or place you work at, your plant or your restaurant or your wherever. They're making money off you. It's just life. When I start my new job on Friday, the company I work for will be making money off me, providing a service. And the company I'm providing that service for will be making money off of me. It's the way of life. Athletes make money for their owners, for their leagues, for their sponsors. It is the way of life. Just thought I'd put that into perspective. We have these greatest of arguments. It's pointless in the end. But there's nothing wrong with having the occasional pointless argument just to have some fun and to have a little heated debate and just kind of discuss things. I'm not going to defriend somebody if they think LeBron James is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan. I'm not going to think somebody's crazy because they think Mario Lemieux is a greater hockey player than Wayne Gretzky. We put these people on pedestals, but they're not the ones that put themselves on the pedestal. We do it. So when you say you don't like athletes because they think they're they think we're better, they're better than we are. It's not that they're the problem. It's us, the fans, that are the problem. And yeah, they've got egos, but you got the most egotistical guy in the world who flips burgers at McDonald's, thinks he's all that, and he's not going to go anywhere. There's a reason why people get to be successful. Maybe they deserve that ego. You ever think about that? Well, I'm going to put this show to an end. It's gone longer than I thought. Figured I'd riff on this. If you are listening to us on Spreaker, my apologies. During the broadcast, it was interrupted by an internet connection issue that I didn't know about until later on, because on my tablet, which I'm running this Spreaker app on, it had it very much at the top, and I didn't read it until it was too late. And then by the time I fixed it, by the time I actually had a chance to try and do something about it, it was already fixed. So I don't know why my internet dropped out just at that particular time. So, but my apologies for that. I'll make a note of that when I post this up. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I hope you have a great day. Good night, good luck, and may the good news be yours.